I'm George Galloway, and I present Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing Iran and the EU and whether the EU can somehow broker peace in the Persian Gulf, at least an end to unending sanctions against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran hasn't invaded any other country in more than 200 years. I wouldn't like to count the number of countries that Britain and the United States has invaded in those 2 centuries and more. Yet, very recently, the Secretary of State of the United States of America, Mike Pompeo, said that these sanctions, this pressure on Iran, will continue until Iran behaves like a normal country. Perhaps they think it is normal to go around invading, attacking, occupying other people's countries. Iran is not just under the worst regime of sanctions in modern times, even worse than the sanctions against Iraq that preceded the 2003 invasion of Iraq. People are dying because of those sanctions, and Iran is being increasingly inhibited, partially prohibited from its lifeblood, from exporting its oil production. Now, the sanctions on Iran are one thing, but the country is now surrounded by hostile military bases and its waterways patrolled by increasingly heavily armed naval forces from hostile countries. That may include even Israel itself. An Iranian tanker was recently attacked with 2 missiles, and an oil leak of significant levels has now been reported. The attack has not yet been fully investigated. No one has claimed responsibility. It's being put down to an act of terrorism. But I'm not sure, actually, what terrorist organization has the ability to fire 2 missiles 60 miles off the coast of Jeddah and severely damage a very large oil tanker. It has been claimed, again, not yet substantiated, that an Israeli patrol boat fired these weapons. One thing is for sure. In the tinderbox that is the Persian Gulf, the situation now is that malign actors, even excluding state actors in the immediate region, even excluding Saudi Arabia, with the armed camps primed and ready to go, malign actors who are not necessarily state actors directly, have the ability to set the whole region on fire. And on fire, of course, it would be, because Iran will respond fully to any military attack against her, and with some effect, and probably quite far afield also. Now, the European Union, particularly France, particularly President Macron, are very keen to avoid such a conflagration. They are keen to bring about some kind of return to the negotiating table by the United States, which overturned the negotiating table and walked out of the room when they ripped up the Iran nuclear deal, the so-called JCPOA. It's important to remind people of that, particularly in the West, because events move so quickly, news passes across our screens so quickly these days, that it's easy to forget that there was an Iran nuclear deal that was working perfectly, at least according to the other signatories to it, other than the United States, and according to the Atomic Energy Agency, which has the job of policing such deals. Iran has no nuclear weapons, yet is being threatened by a country, Israel, which has hundreds of nuclear weapons, all of them illegally held, all of them secretly held, subject to no inspection whatsoever. Iran does not want a nuclear weapon, unlike some other actors in the region and beyond. So we have a situation where the EU is trying to bring about a peaceful end to this crisis. And the EU itself, never mind France, even Britain, has declared that it does not accept the destruction of the Iran nuclear deal and wishes to return to the status quo ante, which even Britain believes was working well. So the question, therefore, is what can the EU do about it? Well, on paper, they have started to take steps to try and circumvent the American unilateral withdrawal from the agreement and to try and keep as much of the JCPOA as they can. They have set up financial mechanisms, political mechanisms. They say that they will defend European Union companies that continue to trade with Iran, but that isn't actually working out in practice. Not least because the United States, on the basis of the precedent it set a very long time ago on Cuba, believes that it has extraterritorial rights to apply sanctions against anybody. So it's boiled down, if you trade with Iran, you won't be trading with us. And moreover, you may actually face very severe financial penalties in the US courts. And if you've any assets in the United States, we'll seize those assets in order to pay those penalties. So a weak EU, a belligerent Donald Trump and the United States pulling troops out of Syria, but sending thousands of new troops into Saudi Arabia, just to make this powder keg even drier, even more susceptible to bursting into flames. That's the situation we're going to discuss here today. What's going to happen next in the Persian Gulf, and can the EU do anything about it? As always, I'm joined by an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. Let's hear from one of the experts first. Doctor, please introduce yourself and tell me how you think it looks.
Thank you, George. My name is Dr. Marcus Papadopolous, and I'm the editor of Politics First magazine. You know, George, whilst I'm an opponent of the European Union and quite a bitter opponent of the European Union, one does recognise and commend the European Union for its steadfast support for the Iran nuclear deal. I believe that Brussels' support for the JCPOA is both sincere, I believe it is honest, especially in the case of the Germans and the French. But then we have to ask the question, why is the European Union not able, as it seems it's not able, to actually save the Iran nuclear deal? Well, I think the answer is quite simple, and there's not many things in politics, there's not many things in life in general that is simple, but I think the answer to this is simple. It is because of the American influence, the enormous leverage that the United States of America exerts in the European Union, and in particular in Germany and in France. Now, ever since the end of the Second World War, America has had enormous influence in Germany. Now, given that Germany is the engine, is the driving machine of the European Union, you don't need to be an expert in international relations to understand that if America wants the European Union to do something, then of course it will talk to the Germans privately and in a very hardball manner. So that is why we see a situation today where the European Union does want to save the JCPOA, but is unable to. And it's not just in the context of Iran where we see America flexing its muscles to get the European Union to do something. If we go back to the beginning of 2014, when America placed sanctions on the Russian Federation, the European Union, and I mean now Germany and France, not Britain, Germany and France did not want the EU to place sanctions on Russia. But Berlin and Paris came under massive pressure from Washington and also from its lackey, London, and the Germans and the French relented. And we are seeing a similar situation today where the European Union believes that the Iran nuclear deal is good for peace, it's good for stability, it enables German companies and French companies to trade with Iran, to invest in Iran. However, they are being told by Washington in no uncertain terms this: you, the European Union, has a choice. You either trade and invest with Iran, or you have continuing access to the American market, a market of 300 million people. Now, George, you don't need to be a businessman to understand that you put that choice before any business person in the world. They are going to say, well, we like Iran, we like trading with them, we like investing there, but our business dealings with Iran are a drop in the ocean compared to our business dealings in America. That is the kind of influence that the Americans wield in France and in Germany. It's not just political, it's not just military, it's not just cultural, it's economic. And whilst I believe the Iranian economy has a lot to offer, and it is very, very robust, and I do believe that it can withstand the American sanctions. After all, the Iranian economy withstood the sanctions placed on it after the revolution. They withstood that horrendous war with Iraq. If the Iranian economy can survive that, then I believe it can survive these merciless, brutal sanctions from Trump. The problem is that the European Union, when push comes to shove, is going to choose to continue dealing with the American market, because that's where the money is.
Let me press you on that. Is that where the money is? A market of 300 million in the United States, a very prosperous country, the richest country in the world, is of course extremely important to anyone involved in business. But if you look at the countries that are standing with Iran in this standoff, Russia, China, India, there's three just for a start, which dwarfs a 300 million market in the United States. So why is the United States so powerful in this argument?
Well, let me give you this one example, George. It wasn't too long ago that I was speaking with a German official, and they told me that it is in no uncertain terms like this. Take Bosch, take Mercedes. At the moment, they supply to Iran, but look at how much they supply to America. Just with those two German companies, Mercedes and Bosch, they have a choice. They can continue exporting their goods, wonderful, brilliant goods, to Iran, or they continue doing that to America, and there could be perks for them should Germany decide the European Union is going to turn away from Iran and focus on America. So just look at that conversation I had. Bosch and Mercedes, they either continue exporting massive amounts of their goods to America, or they keep on trading
I've
to
seen
Iran.
a lot more Mercedes elsewhere in the world than I've ever seen.
But there's going to be more in America. There has to be more in America.
America. Ma'am, with your expert knowledge, do you think that is the size of it? Is that the issue?
I think it's the United States' capability to control markets and finance capital.
It's finance, isn't it?
Finance capital is where the United States' strength comes from. So Iran tries to make a deal. They find out, they put the sanctions on. The banks that have suffered, the European banks and HSBC and other banks that have suffered because of the way the United States basically controls is transparent to the United States, every transaction that happens globally. Let me add that sanctions are this extreme pressure of the United States is destroying lives. It is destroying the economy. I think the Iranian economy has survived. It might survive longer. But the way the car industry, for example, has been devastated in Iran because of the fear of Peugeot, Citroën, and other companies. The way graduates, students, postgraduates have been deprived of jobs for which they have trained for years in universities, and they are now unemployed, not because they don't have the skills to use their training, but because there is no job. On the other hand, I think the European Union has to look at this more long-term. For the European Union, the institutions that lasted since the Second World War are being threatened by the current US administration. We don't know what will happen after Trump, but I think that we are in a period where the world is changing. The way, for example, NATO was established, the way the United States saw itself as the global power that held and its ideas shaped and formed many of these institutions. These institutions are being challenged in some way. And therefore, the European Union has to consider, will it be able to survive if it does not take on what I would call the hegemon power, the United States? And okay, maybe the EU on its own is not in that position, but surely the countries you named and the EU together are in a position to challenge the United States. The problem is the will isn't there politically to stand up to the United States. As long as that will doesn't exist, we will see the financial power of the United States combined with its military might. Its military might should not be underestimated. Combined with its military might, trying to dictate politics throughout the world. In many ways, it is completely illogical to identify Iran as an enemy. It is illogical. The reason it does so is because it can only tolerate obedient countries that would accept the state of Israel in the region. There is no other reason. The nuclear story is fake news, in my opinion. There is no such a thing.
Is it Israel? Of course, Israel must be one of the factors. Or is it Saudi Arabia?
It's both. It is the idea that the United States should control the region, and its main allies are Saudi Arabia and Israel. And for those reasons, any opposition, any dissing of that status quo must be crushed. And it's only in that reason, many Iranians go on about Iran's intervention in the region. Well, Iran's interventions in the region have only happened after 2003, okay? And that is the Iraq War and the Bush-Blair administration's overthrow of the Iraqi regime. It's inevitable that any country in the region would have tried to increase its influence in the vacuum created by the departure of a dictator. There is no doubt about it. And that is what has happened. Saudi Arabia can't tolerate this, and Israel can't tolerate this. That is why we are seeing the identification of Iran as the main enemy in the region. There is no other reason for it.
Israel is strong, but Saudi Arabia is not strong, as the Ansar Allah militias, ragged militias coming from Yemen recently proved. They entered Saudi territory. They seized thousands of Saudi forces and all of their weapons. Do you think the Saudi regime is playing with fire in this case?
The Saudi regime put all of its hope on the Trump administration, and therefore is now under the impression that it can become the main Arab power and the regional power, if you like. That's a miscalculation, probably. The fact that the world community can tolerate what happened on October the 2nd, 2018, and the killing of Khashoggi in the Istanbul embassy, shows the power of Saudis and probably the power of their financial abilities. However, I don't think we can't take it a foregone conclusion that there will never be a challenge to this power. And therefore, we are in extremely dangerous and unstable times.
Well, yes, a challenge even from within. Final question, if I may. Recently, drones, quite low-tech weapons, were either flown, if you believe the Yemeni resistance, from Yemen or from sympathizers with Yemen in Iraq, or even, if you believe the United States and Saudi Arabia, from Iran. And they absolutely caused devastation in the Saudi oil industry, sent a shockwave across the world, drove up the price of oil by several percent just with one strike. It seems to me, therefore, that anyone who imagines that a war against Iran, which I continue to believe is unlikely by design but could easily happen by more or less accident, would be literally a catastrophe for everyone involved, don't you?
It would be a very long war, and I think most Iranians would fight for it to the end of their lives, and that will make it a very bloody war. However, I don't think Saudi Arabia is really envisaging that. Saudi Arabia wasn't, as you rightly point out, capable of supporting its own refineries. And there are two ways to look at this, one of which is maybe they should spend more money on training people as opposed to the trashy TVs they use Persian propaganda towards Iranian people. That's one answer to it. But I think the Saudis' hope is that there will be an air raid by the United States, and it will be the air raids by the United States that will finish off Iran. The problem both of these countries have, there is no one who is willing to put troops on the ground in Iran. And that is to our advantage as far as Iranians are concerned.
Sure. I can't imagine. It would have to be the mother of all air raids. It would have to be an air raid lasting weeks, and that would disable Iran. And it's very hard to believe that such an event could happen, that the United States is willing to do it. The backlash in any case would be very considerable. Iran has friends all over the world. You rightly say that even Iranians who hate the government in Tehran would defend their country. This is not Iraq in 2003. Iran is immensely more powerful and capable and united than Iraq was in 2003. Playing with fire is really a considerable understatement. There'll be much more of this after the break. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, talking about Iran and the European Union and whether the European Union is strong enough to do anything about the course set, perhaps for war, by Washington. We took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to see what the people thought. Let's take a look.
Does the EU have an independent policy towards Iran, or are they to some extent beholden to the US?
Well, personally, I don't think they have an independent policy, and I think we as English people and Europeans, we should not be starving people to death and punishing people just because somebody in America disagrees, especially Mr. Trump.
As you know, the US always be the big brother in the world, and then everyone has to follow it, but I do believe that EU does have that autonomy of being independent and able to make their own decision.
You have a situation where the UK is leaving the European Union, you have the onset of Brexit, and the US is using its power and its leverage to exert political pressure on the UK and other partner countries like France and so on and so forth in order to oppose the Iranian deal.
I don't think it's fair, it's not right, because like every country has its own laws and policies, and EU has the right to have relationship with Iran independently and not affected by other countries like U.S.?
I would hope that it has an independent policy. Politics and globalism being what it is, I imagine, unfortunately, that probably the U.S. position maybe influences or would influence the EU, but I would wish it didn't happen.
Why do you think the EU hasn't put the security mechanisms in place to continue trading with Iranian companies as they said they would?
I think largely it's due to the alliance the US has with the EU and the political pressure placed on EU country member states to abide by US foreign policy, and we've seen it on a number of issues, foreign policy issues. So I think with the case of Iran, you have a somewhat quote-unquote hostile country from the perspective of the US, from the perspective of the EU, and you have the US placing certain pressures on the EU in order to toe a specific line.
Well, I think British and European do want to continue the trade relationship. I think there must be some pressure from some quarters, i.e. Mr. Trump or some other countries, but I don't see why we shouldn't be trading with Iran at the moment. They're not doing anything wrong as far as I can see.
I think the EU at this moment spends its most resources focusing on Brexit and it's sort of most of and lost focus on other aspects of the EU.
Why hasn't the EU done that? Done a get around? Good question. Failure of nerve? I don't know. Cowardice? I'm not sure. Yeah.
Most people there are agreeing with Dr. Marcus's thesis that the EU would like to but can't because of pressure. Patrick, is that how you see it? And in any case, wasn't there a false dichotomy emerged from that? That somehow, Britain leaving the EU makes the EU less likely to be independent of the United States, because Britain inside the EU was a ramp for the United States. So actually, in theory, the EU should now become more independent of the United States.
Yes, George, you're absolutely right. Britain was the glove with which the United States could insert its hand into European affairs very efficiently. But I think what previous speakers have pointed out is that military force in Iran is untenable. Troops on the ground are untenable. And with this administration, what you see now is economic warfare being applied more than any time in history by this administration. This seems to be the weapon of choice. Politically, it's certainly feasible now because people see that as a less harmful option than hard military power. But in terms of the sanctions issue and European being independent, this isn't the first go-around on this type of an issue. There was this similar issue in the 1980s where French companies and other European companies were involved in the construction of a pipeline in the former Soviet Union. And Ronald Reagan applied and threatened sanctions. And at that time, the French government stood up for its companies and backed its companies, and the U.S. backed down at that time. So the question was, is that possible today? Or why wouldn't that happen today? And I think the European Union has congealed in such a way that there's more of a uniformity of political thought, more Brussels-centric, that the conditions are no longer there where in a country within the EU, like a France, and we mourn the loss of a great French Republican.
Yes, I mean, the France of Chirac, for example, would have been much more likely to stand up to the United States. It seems to me Gaullism has died as a French nationalism has died as a political force.
It has. So maybe that's not possible now. It takes one country within the EU to stand up and challenge politically. But with all the fragile economies on both sides of the Atlantic, economics is very much a zero-sum game these days, and no one wants to risk any sort of fallout, potentially from, or short-term fallout from a sanctioned standoff. But I think if you look back in history, when you're when you you take the moral high ground or you make a moral argument, more often than not, your allies may back down at that point. But right now, the allies of the U.S. or supposed allies are complying with threats, and that follows game theory for sanctions quite well. And conversely, Iran is not going to come back to the table if it's being threatened with military force and with continued economic pressure. They're not going to come back to the table.
No, they're picking on the wrong people. There are people who do succumb to threats and can be forced to a table to make concessions. But it seems to me the Iranian people are not quite like that, and the Iranian government, state, is not quite like that. That they would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. Would you agree with that analysis?
If you listen to prominent Iranian commentators right now, like Dr. Mohammad Randi and others, that's exactly what they're saying. They're ready for that type of a war, should it come. If the U.S. or Israel or its allies want to bring that level of confrontation, Iran is absolutely ready to go right till the end, and they've made that clear. So, and I think Washington has read those signals.
Yes, I think that's why war itself is probably off the table unless someone else actually sets the fire going. But let me ask you this not just because you're an American, but you have followed all of these crises very closely and reported them well. Is this just the crazy Trump approach to negotiations? Make everyone afraid, make everyone think that something truly dreadful, regionally, maybe even globally dreadful, is going to happen. The North Korea playbook, which is all merely a prelude to a hamburger, a halal hamburger in Singapore or somewhere, talks between Trump and the Iranian leadership.
Yeah, I think absolutely this is the style of diplomacy or lack thereof of this administration. But I thought also, by the same token, if you look at subsequent U.S. administrations, there's an incredible continuity of policy that goes from Republican to Democrat to Republican. And right now the U.S. is definitely in a transition phase. In the Middle East as well, they've recently closed a major base, not closed, but ramped down a Qatari Air Force base, whereby they won't be
because they thought it would be too vulnerable to Iranian counterattack.
Exactly. So they're using part of the U.S. to run those operations on a rotating basis every 12 hours. That plus pulling troops out of Syria, whether they're going to pull them out or not is another question. But the U.S. The political will in the U.S., I believe, is extinguished for the moment for any new overseas war adventures. And that's a political reality. That's a post-Iraq reality. So what do you get in return? A lot of bluster, a lot of art of the deal, a lot of threats, a lot of economic warfare. But the U.S. would be probably looking to pull some of its assets offshore, back onshore, as it were. And maybe having regional partners like Saudi Arabia, I'm sure they've attempted to build them up as a regional power with the war in Yemen in order to help be local enforcers, as it were. So this is something that people have been talking about for decades.
I really caution against that. If you've got any friends in the administration, that is a complete non-starter. The Saudi Arabians are not a fighting people. Let's take the gentleman at the back.
My view about Trump and the whole thing from just a normal guy from Iran is, to be honest, I appreciate when he comes to the power because he has shown the whole world how the politics works in United States for centuries. He has shown, because he's not a politician, he's just a businessman. And he's running the whole world, and he's dealing with the whole world like a businessman. He wants to deal with all these countries. He wants to clear up the country from any foreigners. And then he become a police. Then he become like a biggest army in the world. So if you need somebody to be bullied, you get him to bully it, and he get paid for it. That's all his idea, I believe.
Well, he boasted recently that the Saudis are going to pay them for all that they do, and that's
Absolutely.
a first, he said.
Yeah.
So that transactional approach is, of course, clear now. But I think the idea that the United States is the biggest army in the world, most powerful army in the world, and so on. First of all, it isn't the biggest. The Chinese is bigger. But that died in Haifa Street in Baghdad between 2003 and whenever they
Absolutely.
withdrew. The United States is a wonderful military power from the sky, but it's actually a very poor army on the ground. And I think everybody knows that now. If the primary purpose of the attack on Iraq is, as I believe it was, to demonstrate to the whole world, including China, that the US is number one, the hegemon, I actually think it proved the opposite.
Absolutely.
It has emboldened people all over the world that actually these people are not as tough as they think they are, say that they are.
Well, they haven't won any war.
No.
They've been involved since Second World War.
Exactly.
With Second World War, they had
No, they beat
everybody
Grenada.
involved.
They beat the hell out of Grenada,
Yeah,
a holiday resort
Absolutely.
in the Caribbean.
with no army, no
Of
nothing.
course. The only people that fought them were the
Exactly.
Cuban
and that's what
construction
they're
workers.
good. And he is just becoming a bully in the ring to get as much
Yeah.
as possible from these countries.
I see that. But
That's
to
how
be
I
a
look
credible
at it.
bully, you
Well,
kind of got to be able to carry through your threats, and I'm really not sure that they
even
are.
his threats are like a businessman. This is my deal. If you're not taking it, I'm going to do this. That's how he's dealing with the countries.
That's very interesting. Adam Garrie, you're one of the great intellectuals de nos jours. Is that how you see it? That it's just simple bullying for a transactional benefit gain?
I do. I think that with Trump, it's all about getting the capital. This can be cash, this can be futures, meaning agreements in politics, and of course there's domestic political capital, which in the run-up to the 2020 election is going to be a hot commodity in the US, which actually leads me on to something else that has sort of sprung to mind with all these comments, which are all very good comments all the way around. Countries like Iran, countries that are much bigger and wealthier like China, and every country in between needs to look at how America controls the world. Now, any country can cause damage if it has a sufficiently large military and the technology that these days goes with it. But what really makes the world go round is money. And America has a monetary system that is so broken, so dishonest, so dangerous that the first countries that are able to successfully pivot away from that are going to be in a very good position when we really enter this transition period between China and the United States competing to be the world's most influential power. China's still number two, a very strong number two. It's going to be number one well before the end of this century. And in the middle of the century, we're going to see this transition period, not the kind of blasé one that Mrs. May envisaged in Europe, but a truly epoch-making one. And it's in that period where the boys will be separated from the men, so to speak, in terms of geopolitics. It's that separation is going to derive from monetary policy. My own view is that people should look to a source of money that can neither be created nor destroyed by governments and regimes. Traditionally, throughout all of human history up till the 20th century, that's been silver or gold. And so In Iran right now, with all of the economic problems with which they're besotted, it's not necessarily the easiest time to buy and sell gold. But what they ought to do is issue futures contracts for oil and gas denominated in gold and silver. It won't be huge business now because everyone's sucking at the American teat of fiat money. But if they were to at least put that out, it would show that they're thinking in the long term. And if there is a country that's been around for a very long time, continuously, that is Iran. So that would be my own advice to any country, including the United States, because the American people are going to suffer horrifically once this house of cards that is fiat money collapses. So every country should be looking to do this.
In a way, this was touched on by Dr. Yasmine, that actually it's not so much their market for Mercedes cars or Bosch. What do they make? Sound systems. Is that what did Bosch make? Washing machines. Everything. Okay, I've only got a stereo made by them. It's their control of the financial system. So I'm struggling. I'm not an economist. Why can't that be circumvented? If I buy from you and I agree how I'm going to pay for it, how are we necessarily vulnerable to a guy over there who's got nothing to do with our business with each other?
Well, if one were to establish banking systems that weren't dependent on those which go through the United States, and if one were to use a source of money...
an alternative SWIFT system, for example.
Why
can't that be done?
It can be done. The only problem is it takes a while for it to be established, and frankly, it should have been established possibly by the BRICS grouping early in the 21st century. There's been a bit of lethargy in that. Brazil and South Africa not as committed as they ought to be. India and China have brought their conflicts to the table, even though Xi and Modi just met, so who knows where we might be going for there. But in the broader sense, yes, there needs to be a financial system that isn't dependent on any one country, because throughout history, that's never ended well. Gold and silver, of course, aren't dependent on any country any more than the air that one breathes. It's very environmental in that sense. It's one with the earth, so to speak. Everyone knows that money makes the world go round, but what is money? When you realize that the most powerful country in the world has fictitious money, then that's the beginning of the search for an answer.
Monopoly. Madame Claudia.
Mine is more of a question, actually, than a comment. I grew up in a country that had sanctions, and we were forced to overturn our government and change things. So I do feel for the people of Iran. I do understand that you are going through a lot of hardship, especially with your medicines and so on. So my question is, why are you still building uranium, and why are you ordering uranium? That's my question, because is that not the reason that sanctions have been placed, is the uranium situation?
Dr. Yasmine, I know you're very far from speak for the government in Iran, but deal with that point if you would. Why is an oil-rich, because many people think this, why is an oil-rich country building nuclear power potential in the first place?
The argument put forward is that in the long term, you could use nuclear power for internal consumption and sell your oil, or you could keep nuclear industries, and if you like, your gas and oil will bring you income to the country. I don't see Iran as building a nuclear bomb. Okay, it can go up to the level near enough for it, but it hasn't done so. And that's why I call the nuclear debate a fake news debate. The real argument about Iran is, why has it got allies in Iraq and in Lebanon? Well, it didn't choose to have those allies, right? What the Iraqi government, that was a secular Sunni state, was destroyed by the United States. You are right, they haven't won the war yet, but they changed the regime. So Iran has allies in Iraq. Iran has historically allies in Lebanon. So it's not really, I can't see Iran intervening or moving deliberately. Then Saudi Arabia finances a Sunni jihadi group like ISIS, and they threaten to come to Tehran. Wouldn't you stop them before they came to Tehran? I mean, it's not intervention in the way of going to war for the sake of a war. And I'm not a supporter of the Islamic Republic, but I can see facts when they are facts.
Yeah, I knew that you would, and I'm grateful to you for that. Let me pose a more difficult question for you. Why shouldn't Iran have nuclear weapons? If Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons, why can't Iran have one?
I'm against nuclear weapons altogether.
Yes, of course.
So I can't say that. But I think for Iran, as far as I can hear, and I think yesterday's comments by the Supreme Leader Friday's comments were very clear, Iran doesn't think that it's Islamic to have nuclear weapons.
No, they said so, that they are theologically
in terms of
opposed to
rational
nuclear
thought,
weapons.
The problem is that, in my own view, the only reason I would say is that it is a very dangerous setup to have nuclear weapons, and proliferation is not going well, and therefore every country, in a way, should disarm of nuclear weapons.
Yes, well, I'm asking as a citizen of a country that argues that its possession of nuclear weapons is a guarantor of peace. Yet we have a situation where India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons, Israel has hundreds of nuclear weapons, but we're ready to go to war to make sure that Iran can never have nuclear weapons. I'm struggling with the logic of that.
There is no logic in that. Israel claims it hasn't got nuclear weapons. It claims the nuclear industry that has been there for years is actually a textile factory, as far as I know. Mm-hmm. And so from that point of view, you are right. You can say, I'm only keeping this for defensive purposes. My argument would be there is no need for that. Once any country in the region uses nuclear weapons, it will destroy the region.
Yes.
And therefore, we should argue for a nuclear-free Middle East, including Israel.
Yes, of course. I was arrested and thrown in jail for protesting against our own nuclear weapons. But let me put it bluntly, if Saddam Hussein had had nuclear weapons, he would not have been invaded. North Korea hasn't been invaded because it has nuclear weapons.
You can get up to the level of nuclear capability, military capability,
without
having
the bomb. Yeah, quite so. I saw a hand. Yes, the gentleman, Winston.
Just a thought that one has from discussing Iran and its uranium. In about 1950, Iran started to get the idea of building a reactor for peaceful purposes.
The US tried very hard to sell them.
And
Westinghouse.
They did have the capability then for having a reactor. That was under the Shah. The question would be, as mentioned, that Iran has large oil reserves. Oil is cheap. They have large gas reserves. Gas is even cheaper for them. Having the ability to create nuclear energy is pretty much a waste of money for their government and for their people, because their people have to pay money to have the investment done for this. They lose money that could be spent on other things. Now, where the problem comes about is since the 2000s, early 2000s, Iran was found to be enriching uranium. Now, basically your uranium comes out of the ground as what they call U-238, which is a fairly stable, you can't use it to make a bomb, it's not going to explode. It's going to produce radioactivity in a reactor that will produce energy and so forth. Now, enriching uranium is basically causing that uranium-238 to change into uranium-235. Uranium-235 is unstable. It's what you use to make a nuclear bomb, a nuclear explosion.
Amongst other things.
Yeah, amongst other things. But the main use for it is to be used for weapons. Because you have U-238, why do you need to enrich it? You only really use that in order to make a weapon. Now, the argument would be, Iran is under sanctions because they are enriching uranium. All right, stop enriching uranium.
Winston. I mean, the JCPOA set a limit to their enrichment, and they were fully complying with that limit.
But the thought is, why do they need to have it at all?
Well, but that's a different question.
No, but that is the basis of the sanctions is because...
In the view of the Germans, the British, the European Union, the IAEA, they were not in any way breaking the deal. So why not leave the deal in place?
But why do they need to do it in the first place?
Well, in a way, that's a matter for them, isn't it? Their business rather than yours.
But the thought is then, if you were doing something and you could potentially be a threat to other countries by doing that, they have the right to say, stop it.
Yeah, but they're not. It's only the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia that are saying that.
Yeah, because the EU can't actually make up its mind on anything like that.
No, that's quite wrong. Every other party to the JCPOA wanted it to continue and declared that it was working perfectly. The word, in fact, of the IAEA was impeccable. That was their word. Iran has impeccably observed its obligations under the JCPOA. And therefore, to upset the apple cart must have another reason. I agree with Dr. Yasmine that actually it's fake news. It's not about that. It's about Iran's growing influence in the Arab world. Well, look, we've run out of time. I want to give the last word to Dr. Marcus. I want to hear from him how he thinks this is all going to end.
Well, can I just very, very quickly, George, say that the reason why the Americans are in charge of the global financial network is really down to this. Whether we like it or not, America appeals to a great many people in the world. Across the world, okay? American.
I must move in different
Well, think about it, George. American culture. How many people here, even if you oppose American foreign policy, how many people here will watch American films, will eat McDonald's, will drink Coca-Cola? The American economic model, the American way of life is extremely popular across the world. The Americans have achieved something, and even though I'm a bitter opponent of the Americans, they have detected something in human nature and they have exploited that. Now, in regard to the European Union and Iran, I regret to say this, George, that when push comes to shove, companies in Germany, companies in France are going to say to their respective governments, we cannot jeopardize our access to the American market. And with that, I can only say the old saying, money talks.
Doesn't talk, said Bob Dylan, it swears.
There you go.
In the words of George Carlin, it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe in it. This has been Kalima Horra. I've been George Galloway. You've been a wonderful audience. Thanks very much for watching.